So one of the things that I find when I'm teaching styles, and I think one of the common mistakes that people find about styles, and one of the common problems with teaching drum styles in drum books, is that a lot of people, they'll learn a beat and they think a beat is a style, and a beat is not a style. A style is really a sound. Okay, so what I wanted to really look at with these series of workshops is I've taught drums for a long time and I've got a lot of material, so this is just picking out some of the stuff that I teach, but I put it together in this idea of styles to try and get this idea of that when we study the style, we really have to study the music as much as we study the drums. And I think that sometimes we think too much about the drums and not enough about the music. And very often, if you come into a style that you're not familiar with, I think the common problem and the common mistake is to think that I've seen a drum beat in a book, and then you practice the drum beat, and of course it's not going to sound right, because a style is the sound is really important part of a
Yeah.
style. So those Spotify playlists that I made are like recommended listening, and the idea is that if you can get a good half a dozen or so tracks, ideally much more, I would say like 6 albums worth is probably what you need to listen to. But what you should notice as you listen to those tracks, you'll start to notice the commonality across them. Okay, and you'll start to hear some similar sounds. And for me, what I like to think about a lot when I'm studying music is I talk a lot about ingredients, the ingredients of the music. Okay, and for me, music's a lot like cooking. All right, so you got to get the ingredients together, and then it's like what you do with them. You see, so when you look at a certain style, there's an overall sound of the whole thing which you'll get from listening to the records. But as you dig into a little deeper, when you start listening to the drums, you'll notice that there's certain sounds that they use,
Yeah.
okay, and certain ways of playing. And so if you can really start to get those sounds together, I think that's a big part of getting the style together. Now there's two things that go into the sound as far as I'm concerned. There's the actual physical sound that you get. So you may, like when you play your hi-hats, how do you play them, tight or loose? Or if they're loose, how loose? And things like this. So like this is a big part of the sound. And things like maybe you'll use a rim click, or you'll use, the bell of the cymbal. So certain sounds are very, very common in certain types of music. But then there's another very important thing about sound, which I think is often overlooked, and the reason is because you can't write this down. Okay, and it's what I refer to as the mix on the kit. And I've seen it before. Sometimes people talk about the internal dynamics, and basically what I'm talking about is the levels of the drums. Okay,
Mm.
so for instance, if we just take the bass drum and snare drum, I mean, if we're going to just on a very, very general kind of overview, you could say that, say, for instance, if you're playing pop music, the bass drum and the snare drum want to be about kind of even. Like if you listen to a Michael Jackson record or something like that, they're kind of even. But if you play a rock tune, right, the bass drum's going to be a little more dominant. It's going to be stronger than the snare. And one of the things about funk is that it's the other way around. Okay, so the snare needs to be much stronger than the bass drum when you're playing funk. Okay, and then now there's a lot of reasons for this, and I think that's one of the classic mistakes that people make again when they see a drum beat and they start bashing away and they play, and so you can get a page of drum beats, and then you just I've actually heard it, and they play them all the way through and they just all sound the same, but they're not playing a different style. They're just bashing through some drum beats. And I think if you're going to play funk, you want to sound like a funk drummer. What you don't want to sound like is a rock drummer playing a funk beat. Do you
Mm.
see what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so for me, like that's really the key to it. And those things you can't write down. You can't write them down. So you have to get that from listening to the records. But I think when we listen, we need to listen with an sort of analytical sort of understanding of what's going on. That can really help as well. So the other thing about a style is, of course, is we need to understand a little bit about how the history of the music. And 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 the great thing about studying a recording as opposed to a sheet of notation is that when you study a recording, it puts you in a time and a place. Okay, because that recording is a capture. It's a snapshot of a time and a place and a, so the style is as much